The alternate.
Morning, Brad Patterson just joined. I'm sorry, I planned to be there at the Utopia offices in person, but I got as far as 6 North in Salt Lake, and it was 8:48. And I decided I didn't have a chance of making it out to 58 South and 9th East. And so I ducked off the freeway and just walked into my office. So sorry, I'm not there in person. I'd like to be there.
Hey guys, sorry I'm a minute late here too.
No problem. There's just staff in the room anyways, Brad, so the board members are all joining remotely these days, so I think it's just fine to join remotely. So we've gotten pretty used to this.
You know, it's interesting. I was on the freeways today. There was no accidents whatsoever. The only thing that I saw that was causing the delays were socks in the freeways. So I don't know why socks would cause that, but.
Okay, hey guys, having just popped on, I don't even see the agenda. Oh, there it is. Sorry, I got it.
I can share it if it's helpful.
No, I've got it here. I just got to get scrolled down to it. Okay. Krista, do we have, or Roger, do we have a quorum? Are we ready to go?
Yes. Yes. Yep.
Okay, well, let's just head on to our one item agenda then. Approval of resolution UT 22-09, in which we hope to get our swap financing changed over, refinanced, refunded, however we want to term that. And I'll turn the introduction of that to Roger Timmerman, who I then assume is having Laura and Brad participate.
Yeah, I think they could probably explain this better. I've been through it a whole bunch of times, and I'm not a finance person. I know this has been a problem, the structure of the bonds at Utopia. So I've dealt with the consequences, but not necessarily all the terminology and the structure of it, the details I can't explain as well as they can. So I'd love, Laura, if you would be willing to just kind of give us a little bit of the history and explain, where we were and what we're trying to have instead and their purpose for this refinance.
Yep, I'd be happy to do that. So good morning, everyone. It occurred to me, and it should have occurred to me sooner, but it occurred to me yesterday when I got a request from Orem City to, give them a little bit of the history. And I thought, I have lived this since its inception. And so in my mind, it's like, oh, everybody knows, right? The detailed history of Utopia would take longer than the hour and a half that Roger was joking about this meeting going. So I'm going to give you just a very super high level, because derivatives, which a swap is a derivative in and of itself, takes a fair amount of time to understand. I do a really good job of it with a whiteboard and 3 boxes and some arrows, but I don't think we need to go into that. So back in 2004, there were 11 pledging and by voting members of Utopia that entered into sales tax pledge agreements to support the Utopia debt. Bonds were issued. We actually were going down the path of doing a fixed rate transaction. And then there was some concern by some at Utopia relative to the time that might take, and they were approached by Bank of America to do the underwriting and provide a swap, and the transaction was changed. The time constraints were very much politically driven, and so bonds were issued on a variable rate basis with a long-term fixed rate swap. I was, just as a little sidebar, I wasn't fully on board with the long-term fixed rate swap. I advised that if they were going to do that, we do a 10-year swap, because whatever term you swap to effectively almost makes it like you have bonds that are not callable. Because you deal with that whole swap transaction until the date of that swap. So we entered into that swap to get the deal done, and then market conditions deteriorated related to the swap. There's payments that are tied to certain indices, and historically those indices, tracked, very narrowly, and so the swap was set assuming that. And then in the Great Recession, those those diverted, and we were to a point, frankly, where if we hadn't have restructured then, the bonds would have defaulted. So 10 of the 11 pledging member cities agreed to extend their pledges in terms of length and amount by increasing that the 2% a year, so that we could avoid a default and take Utopia on to gratefully the success it is now. Was extraordinarily stressful at the time, and KeyBank and B of A stepped in because we needed to have what effectively a perfect hedge. We couldn't have the markets kind of diverting away from us. So if they did that again, we just couldn't do that. So they each bought the bonds as well as provided the swaps that we needed. And so once that was done, with interest rates dropping, the swap has been out of the money. There's you can always terminate. It's a matter of what is the cost to terminate. And we've been watching it, and the cost to terminate has always been significant. That's come down as interest rates have gone up, but then the interest rates on the refunding side have also gone up. So there kind of has to be this perfect timing in the market, and I can't guarantee that we will hit that perfect timing. We ran numbers, initially we thought there'd be about $1.4 million in savings when this was all done. That has kind of dropped to $1 million. And then I was, told yesterday, although I haven't double checked those numbers, either from a swap termination standpoint or, market rate on the new bonds standpoint. But I was told by KeyBank Capital Markets that, they're currently seeing about $500,000 in savings on the transaction. So it's important to note that it's not, if you look at this just from the standpoint of, oh, am I getting, my, standard or what the market deems as acceptable in a standard refunding transaction, we like to aim for a 3% savings on the par amount of the debt. But, it's not likely we're going to hit that. But what we really, really want is to get out from underneath the swap. Once we're into fixed rate debt, we can, then refund in the future much easier, because then we're only, effectively worried about one index, not how these two indexes kind of track together. So, the objective is to save as much money as rational, but the real objective is to get out of this swap. Market conditions affect the metrics of this daily, and so we do want to move as quickly as possible. Not unlike a standard fixed rate transaction. If in the days when we did advance refundings, we can't do those anymore on a tax exempt basis. But when we're paying off higher interest rate bonds with lower interest rate money, we have to fund more principal. So the par amount of the bonds will go up from the par amount that is outstanding to Utopia today, but the interest rate will be lower. So that the net result will be that we'll stay within the pledges that all the cities made in 2008. We all know that that's kind of the sacred cow. We don't go a penny over those. If we did, we'd have to come back to each of you as cities, and not one of us is willing to do that. So the important things are, we will not increase the sales tax pledge of any of the cities, and we will not be extending the final maturity of the debt. If we get to a point where we are at a break even, my advice would be that we still proceed ahead. And if we get to a point where there's a little bit of a cost, my advice would probably still be that we proceed ahead. But again, we'll watch that with the goal of trying to, get as much savings out of this as we can.
Laura, can I interrupt you just a sec?
Yes.
What's driving the savings decrease? Is it the interest rate action, or is it we're narrowing in on what the transaction costs are going to be, or something else?
The interest rate element.
Okay.
So it's, sort of how these two indices move, compared to one another. And right now, the indices on the swap is LIBOR, and the, standard index for tax exempt bonds is MMD. And it's how those two move, against one another. So as you know, there's still interest rate, pressures. I think interest rates are going to increase. We're in an inverted yield curve. My expectation is that if the board moves and, acts on this motion favorably and we can proceed ahead, my expectation is that at some point, and I'm not going to say that's tomorrow or it's next February, at some point, I think we'll hit the point where we're in the money, but I can't guarantee that, certainly. I think it's important for the board to know that if we don't, excuse me, if we don't get this done, there will be further action that will be needed on the swap, because LIBOR as an index is going away and it's being replaced by SOFR. That transition has to be papered prior to the end of June, and there will be some cost with that. I don't yet know what those costs are, but that will be a cost you have to incur if we don't do this and we are just waiting and we have to reset those indices. Negotiations have to happen between Utopia and the swap counterparties. And so there will be some cost there anyway. I'm very, very hopeful that between now and June, we would hit a point where that would make sense to pull the trigger on this transaction.
Between now and June, did you say?
Yeah, we want to get this done sooner. We're aiming to close by December 1st, but the end of June is when we have to have taken the action to replace LIBOR with SOFR.
Okay. Questions from anybody? Commentary?
Well, I think you hit the big things that, of course, we were concerned about making sure that it wasn't going to impact our sales tax pledges or the time on it. As far as, it makes sense to me what you're saying, as far as even if there's a little bit of savings or if we break even, that this is still something that makes sense. Anyway, you appreciate the summary, because I think it addressed everything I was going to ask questions about.
Thank you, Matt.
I did
Laura,
think of
this
it.
is Zach from Layton.
Oh, go ahead, Zach.
You mentioned as we get into the fixed rate with the hope that we can potentially refinance that in the future. Is there a timeline that we have to wait before we can refinance if interest rates do turn and start to move down?
Yes, that will be largely dependent because, backtracking a little bit, historically, 10 plus years, not 9 plus years ago, we could do what's called an advance refunding on tax exempt bonds. The rules changed on that, and we can no longer do advance refundings. Technically, we can do it 60 days in advance of the call date. We used to be able to do it years in advance of the call date. So it'll be critical to get as aggressive of a call date as we can on these new bonds. And talking to KeyBank Capital Markets, they think that they can get an 8-year call without a penalty. We could probably, we could push for a more aggressive call, but there would be an interest rate penalty to that. So the expectation is that we would be able to refund the bonds again in 8 years. And there will be still, significant amount of principal outstanding, which would make that highly probable if interest rates go down at all. But, if we hit let's say we do this, we get it closed by December 1st and interest rates go down in, next year because we're headed into another recession, we won't be able to do anything. We won't be able to take advantage of it this cycle.
Laura, I had another question I thought of. So we go in, we replace the swap with a fixed rate instrument, which we then hopefully will call it a better interest rate in the future. Meantime, while we're making our payments, are we planning on amortize this such that we would be matching what the cities are currently doing in terms of like the 2% increase annually, or something straighter, or what are we thinking?
Yes, no, we're we're planning on looking at the exact cash flow you have with the 2% increase and basically solving what we call solve to fill. We'll fill that up to the penny, so to speak. And to the extent there is some savings, the board does have a choice of whether to take that minimal savings in, a slight decrease. I mean, it would be maybe not quite pennies on the dollar, but let's say for the sake of discussion that we are able to, squeeze $1 million of additional funds out of this. We could not squeeze that $1 million out. We could reduce your total debt service by that effective $1 million. But when you take that, present value $1 million and divide it up by the, by the 11 cities, it's probably not going to be very much of a blip in your budgets, but it's certainly, for your decision, your discussion. I know that, Roger is, has a strong preference to take that money into Utopia and, basically use it to make even more money. If we are able to have some savings. I mean, if we were talking about, $40 million savings, different discussion, right? But we're talking about, something that's going to be relatively small that I don't know that would be noticeable in your budgets, but that is not for me to decide.
Okay. Other questions?
And, I mean, it is a drop in the bucket compared to what Utopia and UIA they're trending in revenues. And, this year there's $4 million budgeted towards, the debt. And so we're hoping to up that number every year. So, we're talking, hey, we might be able to pull $500,000 out of this or $1 million. I mean, it's a one-time thing and pretty negligible compared to what progress we're making on just general revenue growth and our ability to help with that debt service.
Okay. Other questions?
So this is Adam.
Hey, Adam.
Tell us, Laura, what are the downsides to doing this? Any additional risk that we are assuming? It sounds very positive. Sounds like there's some avenues to help provide some relief, but what are those additional risks or downsides for us as a board to consider?
I mean, in my opinion, there really are no downsides. There's a risk that, maybe if we would have waited and done it later, we could save more money, right? But there's no way to know that. Other than that, I would have loved, I mean, if your debt had been structured the way I originally advised, we would have been able to refund the debt at least once by now and save you a lot of money. But because we've been in this, hellish swap, we haven't been able to do that. And if you look at Utopia's financials, there's reporting that has to be done quarterly to the state about your negative mark to market on that swap. And I think there have been times that negative mark to market has been like $100+ million. So in addition to the actual debt, there are points in time that if, the proverbial crap had hit the fan, everything, all the wheels are coming off, you would have owed an extra $100 million just because of the swap. So getting out of that is humongous. And, I say the only risk is, gosh, are we timing it right? Well, nobody's going to know that, right? There have been, most of my career dealing with Utopia, I figured you'd be stuck with this until it got paid off in how many years are left. So to me, the fact that there's any window that we can maybe execute this is great news. And I really don't see any risk with it.
Okay, thank you. Just one more thing really quick sorry, while I've got the mic here. So in the document, towards the end of the document, there's an overview of each city's participation, a breakdown, and there's just a couple paragraphs where it says has some notes that still need to confirm with the cities as far as some rates and things regarding with their sales tax and use revenues. And so just it seems like the document that we're seeing is maybe still in a little bit of draft form. Will we see a final document as a board that has some of that verbiage where it looks like notes? It just has in parentheses that we need to confirm some of these statements.
Right, so and maybe I can let Brad address that, but what you're adopting is the resolution with, the the draft of the preliminary official statement attached to it.
Okay.
All of us need that to be perfected before it goes to the market. There'll be a process on these bonds where we'll get it rated. And I was actually talking to my colleague Nathan just before we got on here, because he's going to be tasked with putting a rating presentation together. And it's going to be a unique one because they will likely rate to what they deem the weakest link of all the cities and their sales tax, because there's no cross collateralization, right? If there was, if city A is willing to step up and pay cities B pledge, if city B falls short, then we would have cross collateralization. They would rate to the strongest link, but no one is expecting that. No one would want to do that. So they will effectively rate to the weakest link. They won't say to us, oh, it's the city, right? But I know that as they look at it, that's what they're going to be doing. So we're going to start gathering information for a rating presentation, that talks about population growth in each city, that talks about your sales tax growth. We're really going to drive home the sales tax sharing formula, that they don't need to be worried about, the largest sales taxpayer in the smallest city leaving, because that's something rating agencies think about. But we're going to say, you don't need to be worried about that, because we get, they get half their sales tax through the statewide sharing formula. So yes, all of that information will need to be perfected. Brad, if you want to, talk about that a little bit more, please feel free.
Yes, thank you. Members of the board, this is Brad Patterson, Gilmore Bell Bond and Disclosure Council to Utopia. Board member Cowie, I think that was a great question. The documents that you have before you are first of all, the parameters resolution, which authorizes the issuance of the bonds that will affect this transaction that Laura has discussed. But then attached as exhibits to the resolution are a couple of other documents. The general indenture of trust, supplemental indenture of trust. Those will be the documents pursuant to which the bonds will be issued, in addition to the parameters resolution. The indenture specifies in more detail the terms of the bonds, like Laura talked about, the redemption features and so on and so forth. So that'll all be contained in the indenture. I think the document you referred to is the preliminary official statement. That has information with respect to Utopia, as well as the individual members who have pledged their sales taxes toward the repayment of the bonds. We are in the process of gathering that data. That data will be completed. We will share with you the final draft of that document before it gets circulated to investors. We anticipate that will be circulated sometime, I think, in the next few weeks, Laura, if my memory serves me right, sometime in November.
Yes.
And so we will give you the opportunity to take a look at that document and then provide any final comments you may have on that. But for purposes of this meeting, in order to get the ball rolling, get the authorization that we need, we have the parameters resolution, which will set forth the broad parameters for the issuance of the bonds. It will designate to certain officers the ability to finalize the terms of those bonds, as long as they are within the parameters that are set forth in this resolution. That will be, if the board decides to adopt it, the parameters that we've talked about for this particular transaction is as long as the bonds are issued within a parameter of $230 million. Now that seems like a big figure, especially since the bonds that are outstanding are in the neighborhood of 185. But what the thing is that there are other costs associated with it, like the termination payment as well. So we have allow a little bit more room than what is currently outstanding to do that. But at the end of the day, it will all be within the pledge agreements. There won't be any increase in the pledge agreements. We just can't do that without going back to your individual city councils. The other parameters we're talking about is these bonds can't be outstanding more than 20 years. They can't have an interest rate greater than, let me look at this, 6%. And they can't be sold at a price not less than 97%. So that's the document that will be that the board will consider for adoption today is the parameters resolution. All those other exhibits, they're still in the process of being finalized, and we will circulate those prior to their execution.
And just for education, the 6% rate is set so that we can price the bonds and get original issue premium, which you would get the benefit of. The true interest cost on the bonds is expected to be, significantly below that.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, let's see here. Last call for any kind of questions or comments.
Wayne, this is Derek at Brigham City. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Derek, go ahead.
Hey, I just had a quick thought, maybe for the Utopia staff. It sounded like Laura said that we're looking at about $500,000 worth of savings right now. Would it make sense to have a discussion of where we would be comfortable as a board so that Utopia staff doesn't have to come back to us on what it could potentially cost to get the bonds refinanced? Like, I mean, my thought is I'm comfortable with $500,000 in cost to get this done, but I wonder if the board ought to discuss that, or maybe that's already in the parameters resolution.
That's a great question, Derek. And before I open that up, Laura, would you give us maybe a little further detail on where you think the likelihood of us getting negative from a savings standpoint could be?
What I would advise is, and I'm sorry I don't have this number yet at my fingertips. We can certainly get that, but I would say if we could put our arms around what the cost would be to transact this LIBOR to SOFR swap, that would be a minimum threshold. Because effectively, let's say that we did nothing and that was going to cost you $150,000, right? Well, then if we do this and we have a loss of $150,000, we're at a net sum zero, really, because you're going to have to incur that cost, right? It's not our choice. It's market shoves it on us that they're going to switch from LIBOR to SOFR. We have to address that. So if we knew that cost, and I think it's going to be in the range of $100,000 to $200,000, but that's pretty high level. But to me, that's where you would be at a real break even, because you are going to have to incur that cost. So if your real break even is a negative $200,000, that would be where I would probably advise. And yet this may be kind of a to Derek's point, I mean, this may be a once in a lifetime kind of thing where we could say, look, we're willing to, suck it up to a negative $500,000 just to get out of this expletive swap, then, then you'd be willing to do that. So I would say at least 200,000 negative would be, very defensible. Anything beyond that, I think is still advisable. I wouldn't go too crazy, but, certainly it's my job to make sure we're not just throwing money away. I have, a duty of care to Utopia. So if we can squeeze out every penny, I'm going to be doing.
Okay. Well, I've known Laura for years and years, so I'm sure she won't mind me teasing her just a little bit with how I'll open the question to the board. Does the board have any thought or comments on what would be somewhat between advisable or not too crazy? I don't mind the 200,000 if nobody else has any hard feelings on it. I'm not even sure I mind the $500,000, as Derek kind of threw out there as a idea. Does anybody else have any strong feelings at all on that?
I think I feel good about the $200,000 to get out of the expletive swap. I think that would I'm okay with that.
Okay. Anyone else?
Maybe we split the baby just to give Laura a little bit more room there and throw in a 300,000 if it's more than that. Maybe we just do a quick rechat with at least our finance people and the board chair. I think that would be helpful. So
I actually think that's a really good suggestion, Adam. I mean, it's just not that hard to get us together electronically. So I would propose that, unless anybody else has a firm or a better idea, that we allow the financing folks and our staff to go to a max of 300,000 over, meaning 300,000 in negative savings on this transaction. And with that, approve this resolution UT 22-09. Open, of course, to any kind of comment or modification, but that's where I would suggest we go.
I just want to make a quick comment on the voting. We have Cedar Hills with us today, and we appreciate that. We love their involvement. We're obviously building the fiber network there. Because this is a financial issue related to the bonds of the pledging members, and they're non-pledging members, so their vote for this issue wouldn't count. They would have a vote for other things. You could adjourn the meeting. and again, it's not to say, hey, we don't want your involvement. I think we're definitely interested in Cedar Hills and their involvement on the board, and excited to have them represented here. But I just want to make the point, when we do go to vote, it would be the pledging members because of it's in the interlocal agreement that created us. There's a section there that describes related to the pledging, and that only the pledging members vote on those issues, but other members can vote on other things.
Okay.
Is that right,
great.
Jeff?
Roger. Appreciate the clarification there, as I'm sure Cedar Hills does as well. So with that note, anybody want to make a motion to that effect as suggested?
I'll make that motion, Wayne. I move that we approve resolution UT 22-09 with the provision that we allow up to that $300,000 in cost as a board. And anything, is that the right way to phrase that, Laura?
Yes.
Okay. And anything above and beyond that, if we would just consult with our finance team and the chair of Utopia for authorization to go higher than that 300,000.
This is Tom Peterson. I'd second it.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. All right, Krista, I'll turn the time to you.
Okay, Jeff Lamson,
Aye.
Adam Kelly,
Aye.
Matt Dahl,
Aye.
sorry.
You're going to be banned.
Oh, that's me.
Okay, I mean,
Tom Peterson,
Tom's aye.
Brenda Moore,
Aye.
Zach Lobson,
Aye.
Jason Sant,
Yes.
Wayne Pyle.
Yes.
That's unanimous.
we've got our marching orders.
All right, very good. Thank you very much, staff and everybody who attended today. If we could have a motion to adjourn, that would be in order.
So moved.
All right, thank you, Tom. And without objection, do I have a vote in favor of adjourning the meeting? All in favor, say aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
All right, very good. Thank you all. Have a good day. The meeting is adjourned.